Let me check if it's. Let me check. Rockfin always takes an extra second there.
Sure thing.
Mm-hmm. What's up, everybody? I'm back. Franco here with Frank Analysis. I'm pleased to be joined once again by Caleb Maupin, who is a socialist and journalist from RT and host of his own YouTube channel named after himself. He is also a widely acclaimed speaker, writer, and political analyst. He has traveled many times to the Middle East and Latin America. He was involved with the Occupy Wall Street movement since its early inception. He is currently involved with a think tank called the Center for Political Innovation. And I'm happy to have Caleb back on the show here. We're going to talk about various topics. So Caleb Maupin, how you doing, brother? It's great to have you back.
I'm good. It's kind of, crazy weather we're having here in New York City. 1 minute it's warm and hot as ever, and then it rains. But, other than that, just hanging in there. How you doing?
Same thing. I was just on the ground in DC and it was so hot. Like we were all sweating. And then on my way back, it starts raining like crazy. And then when I get to the parking lot of my apartment complex, there's a tree that's hit and it fell on a car.
Wow.
Now it's just cloudy. But yeah, I guess because we're near each other in New York and DC, we had to deal with this crazy weather.
Indeed. Yeah, it's been wild. I mean, what went on in the winter with Texas and the power grid and everything. And now what's happening here, we all got a warning on our phones yesterday. Try not to use energy because the power grid here in New York, there's some danger of it going out. Let's really hope that doesn't happen. That would be a nightmare, especially with the conditions in the city already. But there you go. That's the situation.
Yeah, so we're about to, again, we're going to get into a lot of topics, and I want to start out by discussing Caleb's new book, which is called Bread Tube Serves Imperialism. I've had Caleb on the show before to give his critiques about synthetic leftists, which include bread tubers such as Vosh, what else? I can't remember all their names, like Slime Mob or whatever their names are. But you want to tell us more. You want to let us know what this book is all about and what you want the public to get out of it.
Sure. Well, I mean, it was mainly about ideas. That was the focus of it. I criticized them on three main points. The first of which is their attempt to redefine socialism and just say socialism is just an employee stock ownership program. Not make socialism about the banks, factories, and industries being organized to serve the people and getting beyond the anarchy of production. And I talk about their redefinition of socialism. I talk about their weird obsession with fascism and redefining fascism in this very strange way where basically everyone who's not a liberal is somehow secretly a Nazi or secretly a fascist. And then I hit them on their pessimism and their belief that somehow we need to reduce living standards and make the world poorer in order to protect Mother Earth, and their obsession with kind of this desire for some kind of explosive, destructive violence, when in reality, socialism is about city building. And it's about, community, and it's about working people coming together and trying to build a better life for themselves, their families, their kids, their community, their country. Socialism is probably the most optimistic energy, but yet for these folks, it's about pessimism and darkness and destruction. So those are the three main points I hit them on. But I had to start it out by explaining who BreadTube are. To begin with. And in doing that, I actually had some inside information that was passed to me. A certain unnamed source informed me that a certain individual who you'll have to read the book to find out who. But there's a certain individual who's appeared on CNN a number of times and is definitely very old, definitely not a boomer or not a millennial, more of a boomer. This individual has been advising BreadTube behind the scenes, and his connections to American intelligence, to possibly being involved in some kidnappings, his involvement, with some shady groups and some shady individuals, with people, that's kind of the basis for the overall book, giving kind of an analysis of what BreadTube is. I maintain that BreadTube is an entity that has emerged to counter the alt-right. The alt-right represents one faction of the American elite. It's So the alternative faction has covertly propped up BreadTube and created BreadTube as their attempt to push back against it. And that's all well and good. I don't like the alt-right. I mean, they're pretty awful. But at the same time, BreadTube is trying to smear legit anti-imperialists like Jimmy Dore, the folks, from, the Hill, Crystal Ball, and others, trying to smear them as being on the right or the equivalent of Nazis. And that's just not correct. And what they're putting out is not Marxism, Leninism. It's not communism. It's not socialism. It's this new, weird, pessimistic, liberal ideology that leads to some very destructive conclusions. So that's why I decided to write the book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism. And it is selling like crazy. Yesterday, it was number 5 on all of Amazon for the category of anarchism. Okay. That's where it was at. The book on Antifa by Jack Prosbayek, how do you say it? That was ahead.
Prosobic.
Yeah, that was like ahead. That was like ahead by 1. I was right behind that, right? It was, of all the books on anarchism on Amazon, I was number 5, right? I was number 26 in the entire category of socialism and communism. I've been watching the numbers roll in, and it shows that I was right. Some people said to me, why write this book? Why write this book? Why write a book about, people that talk on the internet? Well, we just need to face the facts. More people listen to BreadTube than listen to any communist party or socialist party or more people are listening to them than any Marxist academic, any, communist group, any of the alphabet soup of parties. They are training people in how to think about the ideas that those of us who call ourselves socialists and revolutionaries believe in. And hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have listened to what Vosh or Thought Slime, Skippy the Bear or ContraPoints have said. So we need to, if we're going to engage people, we need to engage with what they have to say. And I'm not the only person who finds their message to be quite disturbing. And so I'm glad the book is out. I've gotten very good reviews so far. I'm planning to promote it on a number of different platforms, and I'm happy with it. And I hope people read it and learn something from it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the influence that the internet has right now on our generation, on the millennials and the Zoomers, is really astounding, right? That they're getting their news from YouTube. They're also seeing it on Twitter, on TikTok. That's how they find these hosts, of BreadTube and all these other synthetic left channels like the Majority Report. Right. So it's a big influence. Like they think that they're getting something legit because it's like, oh, I mean, they're not on mainstream news. Like, the people are starting to lose their trust on the mainstream news. So they think, oh, these people are on the internet, so they're probably more authentic. But then you look at what they're saying and compare it to what the mainstream media says, and some of it is the same thing, but just adding like a little spin to it, like, oh, but I don't like war. They're saying like giving all these like State Department talking points about foreign policy, like the clip that I'm about to show you here, which I'm pretty sure you've seen already, right? These are the Young Turks smearing Aaron Mate while also repeating State Department talking points about Syria and Russia. So let me share the screen for you right now. And let me know if you can hear the audio. Could you hear that?
No.
Okay.
I can't hear it. I think you have to unmute yourself. It's on your screen. Still can't hear it. Now I can't even hear you. I'm not hearing you. I can't hear you. I'm not hearing anything. Not getting any audio on my end. Oh, I heard you this just then. Now I
You
can hear
heard
you.
me?
Now I can hear you. Yeah. I've seen the
Yeah.
clip though.
So yeah. Then they go on to say that Aaron's gonna like wrap himself around a Russian blanket, like pretty much saying like if you guys aren't for the things that we say here at the Young Turks about how you should be against these dictators in Russia and Syria, then you're probably paid by those people. It's absolutely dangerous. It discredits these journalists that expose the corruption that the U.S. does and the war crimes that the U.S. does, right? So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think how dangerous do you think that this is?
Well, again, they're not making an argument against anything that he's actually said, right? If they were to find something if they were to find something that Aaron Mate had said that was false, that would be legit, right? But he hasn't said anything false. They're simply just, pointing to what he's saying and baiting it. And this is a really common tactic by pro-imperialists, right? They're saying, oh, he's denying chemical weapons attacks. Well, actually, if you look at what's going on, members of the UN Chemical Weapons Inspection Team have come forward and said, yeah, it was not an honest report. And emails have been leaked. And it's like, it's not Aaron Mate who's saying this. This is legit, right? And there are a number of international observers that have come forward and said, based on the emails that were leaked from the UN Weapons Inspection Team, as well as just the facts on the ground, we cannot say that we know for sure the Syrian government carried out this attack. And we do know they've lied about weapons of mass destruction before. Every U.S. war starts with a big lie, right? They said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. They didn't. They said that Muammar Gaddafi was handing out Viagra so his soldiers could rape women and that he was going to go house to house and murder everybody in Benghazi. That was a lie, right? Go down the line, right? I mean, they said that Slobodan Milosevic was committing genocide in Yugoslavia. Well, afterwards, the UN said, well, there may have been atrocities that were committed, but genocide, no, there was not a genocide going on in former Yugoslavia, right? The Gulf War. They said they had this woman crying on TV, the Naria testimony. Oh, they're ripping babies out of incubators. Well, we now learn that that woman was not under oath when she testified, and there was no way she could have been in Kuwait and seen what she said she had seen, right? It was staged. Every single war begins with a lie. In Panama, the U.S. invaded Panama, and they said, oh, it was Noriega and the drugs. And we later find out that U.S. troops intentionally provoked Panamanian troops on the border to do it. I mean, how many wars have started? The Gulf of Tonkin for Vietnam. And they're not saying Aaron Mate has said anything false, because he hasn't said anything false. They're saying that, oh, because he said this, he's denying the crimes of a dictator. They create this narrative of things you are not allowed to say, even if they're true. And I see this all the time against RT, against Press TV, against Telesur, against Mint Press, against any real legit alternative media. They don't argue against anything you've actually said. They don't say that you're saying false things. They say you're putting forward a narrative that might lead people to the conclusion that things aren't as they seem. It's like, if you don't follow a script where USA good, anti-imperialist government bad, then somehow you're lying, you're a propagandist. Even if everything you say is true, even if you're making completely legitimate and honest points, dissecting the talking points of pro-imperialist narratives. I mean, and it's really disturbing to see that. And this cancel culture where it's like, because you said this, even though it might be true, this makes you a this. And therefore, you're a rotten, despicable, awful person because you're a this. I mean, this is McCarthyism. This is just classic McCarthyism, plain and simple. There's no other. This is what they did during the McCarthy period, right? During the McCarthy period, you wrote an article advocating for workers' rights. Well, everybody knows that Karl Marx believed in workers' rights. The worker and the capitalist is a communist thing. You're a communist. You're a communist.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, I'm not a communist. Oh, I hate communism. Oh, well, you better prove it. Give us a list of 10 people in the Communist Party that you can turn. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, I will. I mean, this is the same stuff they did during McCarthyism. And it's shocking to me that people on the left can't see this, right? That you can say completely true things, but somehow, because you said it, that means that you're a bad person. You're one of these categories of bad people, right? And the list of bad people gets like longer every day, right? You know what I mean? So
Yeah, like
yeah,
where's the line drawn, right?
there's a new category of bad person every day. It's like a it's like a new adjective they throw at you, right? If you disagree, if you question what the U.S. government says about China, you're then a genocide denier, right? If you question, if you don't agree with U.S. foreign policy in Syria, you're an Assadist, and they invent a new label to put on people. And the memo goes out to all these liberals that if you're one of these people, you're bad. These type of people, they're bad. They're bad. And so it's like, and then everyone has to then rush to prove they're not one of these things. How about we talk about facts? Not what labels we can put on people, but what's true and what's not. How about we talk about that? That's what journalism is supposed to be about, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm seeing a trend here about how the people who repeat this stuff are have ties to or are paid by corporations, billionaires, or the intelligence community. Just like I had no idea that BreadTube had people that fund them that have ties to intelligence. It's not surprising to me.
I mean, the individual who has been acting as kind of an advisor, again, not going to say
Advisor, okay.
Look, he's somebody who's been tied to deprogramming in the past. You can read all about deprogramming and Google deprogramming. It comes from this whole scare about CIA brainwashing and communist brainwashing and the Manchurian Candidate. In the 1960s and 70s, there was an obsession with brainwashing and deprogramming. And the individual who is tied to BreadTube and who has been advising them on very good information from a very reliable source, I have that information. That individual, was the top deprogrammer in the 70s, is still running a deprogramming operation. And basically, it shows that we have a situation where there's a fight in the ruling class, and BreadTube is a deprogramming operation. Basically, they feel that many people have been quote unquote brainwashed by the alt-right, by pro-Trump voices or libertarianism or Stefan Molyneux or whatever. So BreadTube is a deprogramming operation. It's an attempt to unbrainwash people by the alt-right. And it's coming from pretty high levels of the deep state and pretty big corporations, that I would argue. I take apart the various individuals. They're all very, very shady. It's interesting. I've been doing left-wing activism for years. And I talk about my record in the very back of the book. I have a note on the political development of the author. I have a record of being a leftist. I was at Occupy Wall Street. Before that, I was doing police brutality work in Cleveland. But these people came out of nowhere. It's like just out of the blue. They just arose, right? And some of them have got, connections to Hollywood, and some of them are failed comedians. Like, this one person is a failed comedian who was doing movie reviews, and suddenly he's now the internet, the YouTube algorithms expert on communism and anarchism. It's just out of the blue, these people that no one have ever met before. I've been going to protests for years. I've never seen these people. No record of them being in any activist group or leftist group or doing any real life activism ever. But out of the blue, suddenly they're online, and that's who you need to listen to if you believe in socialism and communism. And they just so happen to repeat State Department talking points and smear and try to destroy the reputation of all kinds of people who don't, right? If you don't, suddenly all the real leftists who've been protesting all these wars and exposing these lies, suddenly we're all secret Nazis, don't you know? It's really hilarious. I just wanted to say this, there have been criticisms of this book. It's just been out for a week, right? And they've been criticizing this book. I have not heard one true criticism of this book yet. I'm waiting. I'm sure there's some argument that I made. Someone could disagree. I have not heard one true criticism. One of these hacks, who I didn't even mention in the book because he's not legit and he's not relevant enough, is this bad empanada or whatever. He said on his screen, not a single citation in this book. Well, I will direct you toward the first page of the book. The very first page has a citation. I cite Cornelius Cardew, his song Lords of Labor, and I'll then take you to the bibliography. The bibliography that begins on page 191 and goes on for multiple pages. I cite Karl Marx in this book. I cite Lenin in this book. I cite CIA documents in this book. There are so many citations that he says to his viewers, there's not a single citation in his book. And it's like,
That's so disingenuous.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, he can say that. I can't stop him from saying that. And he's got more YouTube subscribers than I've got. But it's like some things are true and some things are not. My book has plenty of citations in it, my friend. And anyone who buys that will see that. It's not an academic book by any means. It's not, this isn't like a college thesis where I'm citing every paragraph, but the works that are quoted are cited. There is a bibliography. There is, this is ridiculous to claim there's no citations in the book. That's ridiculous. Another thing that was said against the book, and I thought this was amazing, was that I'm describing in the opening chapter, I'm describing different bread tube personalities. And I mentioned H-bomber guy or Brewis, right? Harris, I think it's Harris Michael Brewis. I mentioned him, and it's 2 paragraphs. I'm just describing him. It's not an argument or anything. And I mention that he was joined on a stream that he did to raise money for Mermaids, which is a pro-transgender charity in Britain. I said he was joined by U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Chelsea Manning, as well as a number of Hollywood actors such as Colin Mockery and Mara Wilson. So based on that, this bad empanada character is now telling his audience that I don't support Chelsea Manning and I think Chelsea Manning is pro-imperialist. How does he get that from that? This is like, it's like, and again, like if these people were making honest arguments, I would take this seriously, but they just lie excessively. They're trying to find the secret like Nazi code sign in my hand gestures. These people are excessive liars, right? Vosh has said on his stream over and over again that I am a literal Nazi. Like not that I have fascistic tendencies, that I'm a literal Nazi. Okay. My wife is not white, okay? I spent years going to court with police brutality victims in Cleveland. I was protesting against police brutality long before Black Lives Matter had ever been tweeted out as a hashtag, right? And these people say that I'm a literal Nazi. How in the world can I be a literal Nazi, right? I can be many things, but you think you're going to see me Sig Heiling, with the white nationalists? This is ridiculous. This is just absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that these people, it's like there's the whole expression. If you look at Mein Kampf by Hitler, the literal Nazi, he talks about how when you lie, you shouldn't lie little, you should lie big. You tell the big lie because people find it really hard not to believe a big lie. Well, these people are experts at the big lie, right? They would have you believe that, the International Action Center, Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, the Answer Coalition, all the people who've been leading great anti-war protests over the years and have, broken the sanctions and offered the hand of friendship to the people of the world as an anti-war movement, that they're all Nazis because they don't support U.S. foreign policy. They would have you believe that the tankies of the Communist Party USA, who built the Civil Rights Congress of the United States, William L. Patterson, Paul Robeson, the people that were sticking up for the Scottsboro Nine, Angelo Herndon, a Communist Party organizer who was sentenced to death for handing out leaflets during the 1930s, and eventually the Supreme Court freed him. That these people, because they liked Stalin, which they did, they praised Stalin a lot. Somehow they're the same as white supremacists. If that is not an evil and downright wrong message, I don't know what is, right? But that is overall one of the main points of BreadTube, that those of us on the left who are actually anti-imperialist are Nazis. And that is a ridiculous argument. Another thing to point out is that capitalism in our time is not pencil factories, all right? In our time, we live in an age of giant monopolies, big banks and corporations, big corporate cartels and trusts and syndicates, big, huge corporations dominating the world, holding back economic development, trying to keep the world poor so that they can stay rich, right? That's called imperialism. And Vladimir Lenin wrote a whole book about it called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And, you know, not just Lenin, Naomi Klein wrote a very good book called The Shock Doctrine about neoliberalism and how that operates. And Arundhati Roy, a very good academic from India, has written about this. Noam Chomsky has talked about this. The system of capitalism in our time is a global monopoly system, right? It is a global economic order where big banks and, dare I say, international bankers and corporations dominate the world and hold back economic development. That has been Marxist analysis since the time of Lenin, since 1916 when Lenin wrote about it. But according to BreadTube, that's anti-Semitic. Why? I don't know. I mean, somehow we talk about big banks and corporations ruling the world. They say, you're talking, what you mean is Jews. And it's like, no, we don't mean Jews. In fact, among the richest families in the United States, the majority are not Jewish. The Rockefellers are not Jewish, right? The Carnegies are not Jewish. The Mellons are not Jewish. So I'm not talking about Jews when I'm talking about imperialism. I'm talking about imperialism. I'm talking about economics, for goodness sakes. And that's another thing you're not allowed to do. That's class reductionism, according to BreadTube. You can't talk about workers wanting higher wages. They can't talk about people going on strike. Oh, no. We have to talk about identity politics. We have to talk about white privilege, you know, and this is BreadTube, and this is not Marxism. BreadTube serves imperialism. That's why you should read my book.
When they resort to ad hominems, Caleb, you know that means that you won, right? Because they can't argue with the facts, so that's why they're resorting to ad hominems, because you're disrupting their illusion of reality. Like they're comfortable thinking that this is how the world is. Like, and they have this illusion, and it makes them feel comfortable. So when you present them with things that makes them uncomfortable, like the truth, then it's like their survival is being threatened, and they just lash out with ad hominems. They don't know what else to say, and they lie. And it's unfortunate these lies promote division.
One thing I will say, which is interesting, is that a lot of the content that if you watch, and I had to watch a lot of this as I put the book together, my head was ready to explode watching all this content. But a lot of the content that you get from Vosh and Thought Slime and all of that, they're not talking about ideas. They're not even talking about politics. It's this weird kind of inside baseball of like, did you see what this person just did? Yeah, well, they're an idiot. Yeah, I mean, it's this weird kind of like high school.
So shit talking, yeah. It's like, don't talk to them. They're stupid.
And they're fighting with each other too. They all hate each other. not just those of us.
Surprised me.
They all hate each other. They throw mud at each other, and really so much of what they do, so much cursing. And I mean, I'm okay. I'll drop an F-bomb every so often on this channel, on my channel, whatever. But so much cursing, so much talk about feces, so much talk about sex. So much talk about dirt and slime, and there's just, you get this gross feeling, right? I mean, they're just, and the sad thing is, I mean, look at the suicide rate right now. I mean, so many young people are growing up, and they do feel like they're dirt, and they do feel like they're slime and all of that. And you listen to these people, and they're just hurling negativity, just endless amounts of negativity. Personal attacks on other people, put downs against other people. And then they put forward this argument, there's too many people in the world. We need to degrow. We need to roll back the human population. We're all going to die from some big ecological catastrophe. The government's run by a bunch of secret Nazis. Did your parents vote for Trump? That means they're probably part of this secret Nazi conspiracy. And it's just this endless amount of negativity that comes out of these people. And I mean, it's like, are they doing good by putting this? I mean, it's like, on my streams, I do criticize capitalism. I criticize imperialism, but I am all about making people proud of who they are. I'm all about inspiring people and telling people to go out and fight for justice. That's why I became a socialist. I wanted to be part of creating a whole new world where we didn't have the chaos of the market and greed. We actually had a rational economy. Socialism for me has always been about optimism. It's always been constructive. And I'm really proud of the fact that I started to put on a suit, because when I went to Ecuador in 2013 to the World Festival of Youth and Students, a global communist gathering, I met communists from Vietnam. I met communists from Angola. I met communists from India. I met communists from many different countries, Bolivia, Venezuela, and they were all wearing suits, and they were serious politicians who, they led organizations of millions of working class people that were fighting for their rights and organizing in their communities. And honestly, in the book, towards the end, when I'm talking about my own development, I'll say that probably the closest thing to what a communist party is supposed to be that I've ever seen in the United States, the closest thing I've ever seen was a black nationalist organization in Cleveland called Black on Black Crime Incorporated. And they were a black nationalist group on the east side of Cleveland. They were led by Art McCoy, the owner of Superfly Barbershop. And whenever anything was going on in the community, they would have, every Wednesday they had a meeting, and there'd be 80, 90 people there, and they would talk about hospital closings. They would talk about the rent. They would talk about the speed light cameras. They would talk about police brutality. When gangs were fighting each other, they would go out and negotiate a truce to bring peace to the community. That's what a communist party is. It's the center of the community, the organizers. That's what the Black Panthers were. That's what the Communist Party USA used to be in the 1930s. And if you go to Venezuela, that's what the United Socialist Party is. And if you go to Iran, that's what the Basij councils are. You go to China, that's what the Communist Party is. You go to Greece and the parts of Greece that are run by the Communist Party. You go to India and Kerala, where the Communist Party is the majority party. They're in the community. They're meeting people's needs. They're assembling people. They're involving people in the political process. That's what a communist is supposed to do. A communist is an upstanding citizen who loves their country and loves their community so much that they want to get rid of the greed of big corporations and put the people first and bring people into politics, expand democracy. That's what a communist really is. And it's not somebody sitting on the internet talking about the end of the world while they cuss up a storm.
Well said. Yeah, it should be about empowerment, not making people feel bad or feel people ashamed if they show traits that some of the people that they criticize show, right? You want people to feel empowered to make a change, right? You want people to feel optimistic about that, not just like constant talk of gossip or he said, she said. It's truly immature. It tells you a lot about the state of mind that these people are, and it's quite sad, right, to see how they haven't grown. They're man children, or if they're female, it's like women children. That's what I've seen. And I see it over with the Young Turks also, and with some of these other people that don't call themselves like communists or whatever. They act like they're in high school, right? Just like how you were saying, with the constant talk of gossip and how this person's stupid, this person's aligning himself with fascists, right? So many labels thrown at people, and it distracts from the actual issues.
Well, but it's worse than that, because it's a side effect of a bigger economic problem. Millions of young Americans have been deprived of the dignity of adulthood. When people can't have enough of a good paying job to get their own house and to get married and support their own children, when they've been robbed of the dignity of being an adult, when they're reduced to living off their parents, even though they might be working a full-time job, they're not making enough to live on their own. When you rob young people of that economically, that takes a psychological toll on people. And that's what we're really seeing with the internet, drama that has emerged. And the alt-right was probably the first blatant example of that. The meme culture and the incels and all of that was like the first thing. But BreadTube is a continuation of that. Millions and millions of young Americans who thought they would have a decent life and a decent career as part of the American middle class are living under the collapse of capitalism. And they have been reduced to being almost permanent teenagers, right? And they've been robbed of the dignity of being able to grow up and being able to have the dignity of being an adult. And that's a crime. And that is what this capitalist system has done. And we should be very outraged about it. And I think the BreadTube, silliness is a symptom of a bigger problem.
Yeah. And you were talking about the alt-right. Millennials and Gen Zers are being molded into being afraid of Russia and China, just like the boomers and the Gen Xers were molded to fear the Soviet Union during the Cold Scare. So do you agree with this claim? Like, are you also seeing, like, not just like with BreadTube being afraid of like Russia and Syria, but in the right, are you seeing a lot of fear mongering about China?
Sure. Well, again, these allegations about Uyghurs. Now, I mean, it's very possible China could be doing bad things, but the very over-the-top claims, they all get back to one guy, Adrian Zenz.
Yep.
It's not exactly the most credible source if you look at some other things that he said. But yet, you either repeat exactly what he says or you're a quote-unquote genocide denier and you must be canceled. I mean, this is silliness, but on the right, they're doing the same thing, right? China's coming to get us. They're the big, scary evil coming to get us. But at the end of the day, I mean, the enemy of American working families, it's not in China, it's not in Russia, it's not in Venezuela, it's not in Iran. Our enemy is on Wall Street. It is the big corporations and banks that have driven living standards down, driven people into poverty, started huge, horrendous wars where, working class people are sent off to die in the Middle East for their profits, all so they can set up a global system of big banks and big corporations dominating the global economy, keeping the world poor, driving the living standards of the Western countries down while they drive the living standards of the developing world, even further down, driving the world into greater and greater poverty so that they can stay at the top. Right? They are trying to degrow the world. On the right, it's framed in terms of libertarianism. Oh, we got to cut. Can't have the government do anything, privatize everything. On the left, it's often framed in terms of climate change. Oh, we can't have economic growth, right? Greta Thunberg, how dare you? How dare you? How dare you have economic growth, right? But we've all just got to be poorer so that the big banks and corporations can stay at the top of the world. Meanwhile, there are countries that have broken out of this system around the world. Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. And in those countries, they've said, you know what? We're going to control our own economy. And we're going to develop. And we're going to use our oil to build up our own economy. We're going to raise our people up out of poverty. We're going to start building our own power plants and steel mills. And, we do have an issue with fossil fuels. So what are they doing in China right now? Fusion energy, right? They have built this artificial sun facility. They're speeding ahead with fusion energy. And Russia has called for a global united effort around fusion energy. One thing that I have been repeating on many of my lives is I think that if we want to deal with climate change, right? Because this is an issue, we want to deal with climate change. What we ought to do is there should be a territory in the Midwestern heartland of the United States, and we should fly in all the best scientists from around the world, have it be a joint effort between Russia and China and India and South Africa and the United States and every country in the world, and build a facility in the center, the heartland of America called Fusion City, a whole city where all these scientists do nothing but get fusion power to work, get us off fossil fuels, build Fusion City. And if we put all of our effort, if the global community put all of its effort and resources into erecting Fusion City and putting all of its funding and all of its energy into getting fusion energy, I think fossil fuels would be a thing of the past within a decade, within 5 years maybe, if we actually put energy into it. Right now, this program of subsidizing ExxonMobil to do it, that's not going to happen. This effort, these sanctions that prevent Iranian scientists from working with American scientists, that's not going to do it, right? I have interviewed a couple of years ago, I interviewed Dr. Eric Lerner, the lead fusion energy researcher in the state of New Jersey, and he talked about how the sanctions on Iran have hurt his research, and he was unable to trade papers with the labs in Iran. But imagine all those Iranian scientists, all those Russian, Chinese scientists, all of our best scientists that are working on fusion energy here, all flown into Kansas or Nebraska, where we in the middle of the cornfields build a beautiful, huge facility. And we say, you scientists, you are not leaving here until we have fusion energy. That is the answer to climate change. Fusion City now. That's the answer to climate change. And next time you hear them talking about climate change, say, are you for Fusion City or are you against it? Because that is the answer to climate change, right? There is no limit to human growth and creativity. You're not going to roll back the human species. We're not going to have less than we have. We're not going to have less people. We're not going to, reduce ourselves to the level of technology they had in the 1800s. Not going to happen. The only way out of this is to move ahead. When was the first ecological crisis that human beings had? It was between the year 3000 and 4000 BC, when we got too good at hunting and gathering, right? We were good at hunting and gathering. We made, sharpened sticks to kill those animals, and we knew the patterns in plants, and we were hunting and gathering so well that hunting and gathering was unsustainable. So what did we do? Did we just stop hunting and gathering? Did we all just start eating half as less? No, we developed agriculture, right? We started growing our own food. We started domesticating animals. We moved to a higher mode of production. We advance. We changed the way we operated with our environment to make it more sustainable. And that's what we need to do again. Fossil fuels isn't working, so we need to move to a higher stage of development. But why are we not doing that? Why? Because look at all the big Wall Street banks. They're all tied in with oil companies. British Petroleum is HSBC Bank. ExxonMobil is Chase Bank. That's JP Morgan Chase, right? You can go down the line. Oil, the world runs on oil, right? And it's not just, airplanes. It's not just cars. If there's anything plastic, you have anything plastic, that's oil, right? That's petroleum, right? The world runs on oil right now. And Wall Street doesn't want to change that, because if that changes, then Wall Street's not going to be at the center of the world, right? If we move to fusion, it's very, very likely that we will move toward a multipolar world where the whole world won't be centered around Wall Street banks and Wall Street oil companies, right? And that's what they're afraid of. They know that it's time to move beyond fossil fuels, but they realize that moving beyond fossil fuels means the end of their hegemony. And that's what they're scared of.
Right. We need to move forward, just like how you've been saying, because that's what Marxism is all about. But we need to make sure also that that capitalism's not getting in the way. Otherwise, things are going to move forward, but only only for it to favor a small amount of people, the elite. They're going to fund certain research that'll just benefit them, while the ones that could benefit more of society are not going to get funded, right? So we have to also make sure that capitalism is not getting away as we advance with technology. So that way, we're not still over exploiting resources, damaging the environment, just so a few companies that present themselves as though they're going to be good for the environment, like these big green oligarchs that prop up Greta Thunberg, right? Like how you were just how you brought her up earlier. We need to make sure that it's not just going to be them benefiting, off of the system, off of this capitalist system that we have, and that all of society is actually benefiting. So during Trump's presidency, there were the right had its thought leaders that were pointing out the inconsistencies of Russiagate that were being repeated by the mainstream media. Right. So I'm about to show you a clip of Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec, which you mentioned earlier as well. And they have a large right-wing audience. Tim Pool claims to be a centrist or a moderate leftist, and Jack Posobiec is an open conservative. Now, I don't have a problem with them being that. The problem that I have is when they repeat State Department talking points about other countries. So again, they gain their credibility from their fans by pointing out inconsistencies by the neoliberal Democrats about Russiagate while Trump was in office. And like Tucker Carlson, Tucker says a lot of factual things about foreign policy, but he will mislead you when it suits his culture war, anti-communist narrative, right?
Yeah.
However, it appears like Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec are being hypocrites in this clip that I'm about to show you, because they're Russiagating, but about China. They flip the script. All right. So it's dangerous, right? Because it increases tensions and manufactures people's consent to increase sanctions, which is an act of war against these countries. So yeah, I'm gonna play this clip and let me know what you think. And also let me know what you think they get wrong.
Sure.
Let me know if you can hear this.
Are familiar, it means white left. It's their word for.
Let me slow that down. That's way too fast. All right, you can hear it?
Yeah.
All right.
SJW. But no. If the U.S. loses this economic conflict, this trade war, the economic war, or even the Cold War or the hot war, whatever it becomes, they're not going to live anywhere near as good as the people of China will live. So we can say like, oh, we'll send them to China. Well, I mean, Chinese cities, they have political problems, there's authoritarianism, but the people still live in city conditions. If we go to war and we lose that war, it's like then you live at the whims of your
I see what you're saying, right?
Yeah, they're going to be living like POWs. They're going to be
right. So your ability to protest, that's gone out the window, right? Your blog, your social media accounts, your Tumblrs, or whatever it is where you're going. The reason I mentioned Tumblr is because that's it's like oversharing, right? It's over free. It's who can say the most taboo thing, who can push the most buttons. That's gone. That's gone overnight.
They're
Jack, you're going to start to make people support the CCP.
I know, right?
They're going to have these. I love it. There's this meme where these leftists are
I'll tell you what to think about Christianity next.
No,
There's this meme where the leftists, like the Bernie people, are like, we should put the 1% in gulags, make them break rocks for a few months so they know what hard work is like. It's like, bro, you guys don't do hard work at all. Like, I think if what they don't realize is that the things they're advocating for would put them in gulags breaking rocks so they can learn the value of hard work. They're not going to go to the guy who's like working at a steel mill. They're not going to go to the guy who's a construction worker. They're just going to be like, keep working. And they're going to be like, okay. They're going to go to the intelligentsia, the college academic kids, these activists, and they're going to be they're the problem. Whenever these takeovers happen, they immediately try and purge the intelligentsia who made the revolutions happen.
100%. Yeah, those people are dangerous. They're subversive.
Right.
There's a reason that we don't talk about the Mensheviks anymore. Yeah. Everyone knows what happens to the Mensheviks.
So, but ultimately, I bring this up because it's like if war is inevitable, our greatest weakness is our internal conflict. I mean, there are already people who have been super chatting us, saying things like they think it's China's plan to promote these leftist anti-American ideas.
Well, sure.
To teach anti-American history lessons, to claim the country is awful. What happens then if there's complete demoralization, and then a Chinese boat crashes?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say something real quick. You can hear me?
Yes.
Them saying that China is trying to promote these anti-American messages, isn't that similar to what Rachel Maddow and TYT and all these people that were repeating State Department talking points about Russia were saying about Russia? It's like, oh, they're spreading anti-American messages through their memes to ruin our elections. Do you see some similarities with that?
Well, they forgot to mention that China is actually putting mind control in all of our water and poisoning our precious bodily fluids. Have you ever seen Dr. Stone?
Yeah.
I mean, that's clearly what's going on. I mean, it's funny what they're describing here. They made a movie about this, actually. You can watch. I think there's one called The Red Menace from the 1950s. I think there's another clip from. There's a number of old 1950s clips that sound exactly like what they're saying. There's one where they've assembled all the young people, and there's a guy in like an outfit, and he says, "All right, children. Your job is to purge the minds of your reactionary American parents and get them to accept the communist way of life." I mean, this is like Cold War scare porn. Look, China is not on the brink of taking over the United States, okay? I think the last thing that China wants is an open war with a country that has the biggest military on earth. In fact, China is going around the world. Their vision is for win-win cooperation. They do business with countries, and on that basis, they try to have peace with them. China doesn't export its own system to its closest allies, okay? The military junta in Myanmar is aligned with China, but they have a completely different system, a completely different ideology, a completely different worldview, and China says that's fine, and they do business with them, and they have a relationship. There are all kinds of African countries that are free market, anti-communist countries, and China does business with them, and that's how it works. So if China is not imposing their system on their best friends, why in the world are we thinking of this apocalyptic scenario where like the Chinese tanks roll in over the border and then at the barrel of a gun they force us to adopt the Chinese system? They call their system socialism with Chinese characteristics because it wouldn't work in another country. That's the entire premise of Deng Xiaoping theory. It's the understanding that this is socialism for China, and it's a unique form of socialism for China. So what they're preaching here is just completely ridiculous. It sounds like something from an old movie. You ever see Red Dawn in the 1980s? It was a movie with like Patrick Swayze, right? And it's like these kids are in their science class one day, and all of a sudden a bunch of Soviet Cuban paratroopers land outside the school and shoot up their teacher. And I mean, this is ridiculous Cold War propaganda. What's interesting though is that that their narrative, where the criticism of U.S. society is part of the Chinese Communist plot. That's interesting because I think they've got it kind of the opposite. During the Cold War, It was American intelligence realized that one of the weaknesses that the United States had was that, it was an imperialist country, and was that it treated black people horrendously and had a whole, system of Jim Crow in the South. And it was, the way that Chicano people were treated. And part of the reason we have a modern civil rights movement is because the communists were organizing around civil rights. And on the basis of that, the government of the United States realized that if there was some kind of crisis, there might become mass sympathy for the communists. The modern civil rights movement was an attempt to kind of steal the thunder of the communists. And a lot of the more liberal policies are intended to change the image of the United States. Right now, Joe Biden, he doesn't want Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela to be able to say that the United States is an evil imperialist country. So he's trying to give the USA a complete woke makeover to make the United States look like it's the most friendly, non-racist, tolerant society ever. That's what he's trying to do. And so it's the woke politics. It's not about making Americans hate their country so that we can have it. It's the opposite. It's largely making people around the world think of the United States as a more benevolent country and try to smooth over the very ugly history that everyone around the world is aware of. So they don't get that. But, I saw that chat that just went by from Ramiro. And look, if China is the country that wants war, why is it that Chinese ships aren't all over the Gulf of Mexico? It's actually American ships that are all over the South China Sea, right? So why are there not Chinese military bases being constructed all across the areas around the United States? Well, actually, it's American military bases that are constructed in South Korea and in the Philippines and in Indonesia and all throughout the Pacific. There's American bases. There's only one overseas Chinese base, and it's in Djibouti. And Djibouti is very far from the United States of America. So if it's China that wants war, you'd think they better hurry up and get their bases built, because we're the ones who are set with our bases, set to launch missiles, set with our battleships in the South China Sea. Looks like we're the ones that are set for a war against China. Doesn't look like what China's setting up for a war against us.
And John Kerry was saying that for in order for us to combat climate change, we need to build more military bases wherever China is making negotiations with countries for for cleaner energy. Isn't that so ridiculous? Like, it's like, in order to combat climate change, we need to build more military bases and increase tension so we can have a war, which can destroy the planet even further.
Well, I understand the U.S. military is one of the biggest polluters that exists.
Yeah.
Those battleships, I think they use a lot of fossil fuels. I think those jet planes, those fighter jets, those are not exactly hybrids. I don't think they run on soy. I don't think they have fuel cell jet fighters. So that's pretty ridiculous. But what he's saying is that, China goes around the world, and in countries where they're developing and people who didn't have running water and electricity are starting to get it, China builds power plants. I've been to Brazil. In Brazil, China has built loads of hydroelectrical power plants. Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff, the social democratic leaders of Brazil, they worked with China, and they brought electricity to people in impoverished regions of Brazil who hadn't had it before. And it was because of China. And they built hydroelectrical power plants. They built coal power plants. Well, the United States wants to be able to tell countries in Africa, oh, you can't do that. Oh, China wants to help you build a power plant. No, you got to stay poor because it's good for Mother Earth. That's what they're trying to do. And it's not really about Mother Earth. It's about that country staying poor. So at that point, when the country's poor, it has to import its steel from the United States. It has to import its oil from the United States. It has to import its products from the United States. And it's an impoverished captive market. But when a country gets its own electricity, and when people are rising up out of poverty, and when local domestic businesses are flourishing, suddenly they're going to be making their own steel. And they're going to be making their own aluminum and their own oil, right? They're going to be making their own products. And that's what they don't want. They want to hold back development. Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is not a cultural relationship where somebody acts chauvinistic to somebody else. Imperialism is an economic system that's about holding back development. Imperialism is about keeping countries undeveloped so that they are captive markets, so that a monopoly can be maintained. That's what imperialism is. It's about holding back economic development. You gotta forget Avatar. Forget the movie Avatar, right? It's a great movie, but it has nothing to do with the economics of imperialism. Imperialism is about preventing economic development. And that's what the imperialists do. Honduras and Guatemala are a great example of that. Those are two countries that have been under the domination of U.S. imperialism for a very, very long time. And as a result, there are whole swaths of Guatemala and Honduras that don't have running water, that don't have electricity, that have people who don't speak the Spanish language and are not literate, but rather speak indigenous languages. And they are deeply poor. You have drug gangs running around, tearing the place up, killing people because there's not a strong, vibrant economy. So the narco gangs take the place. An underground economy takes the place of it. And with U.S. drugs, with U.S. guns, these drug cartels are running around terrorizing people. That's imperialism, keeping Guatemala and Honduras poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. And they import all of their products from the West and from American corporations. But if you look at Nicaragua, a country that has broken free, they have a lot of stores. They have a lot of people rising up from poverty, but they're making their own products. They're working with China to develop their own industries. It's a very different situation because they've broken out of imperialism. And ultimately, we look at what's going on the border right now, this border crisis, right? Kamala Harris is our border czar. She hasn't even been to the border yet, but she's our border czar. She's supposed to be on the case, which is why many people are very worried, because if she's on the case, I think we're still going to, be in a lot of trouble. But the right wing is playing up bigotry. They're playing up bigotry. They're saying, these immigrants are all drug dealers, build a big, huge wall, fund ICE. Well, that's only going to make the problem worse, right? When you make immigrant communities afraid to call the police, when you have, a situation where there's, doors are being kicked down and people are being raided, workplaces are being raided, people are afraid. That's where drug gangs like MS-13, that's how they flourish, because people turn to them when they're afraid to go to the authorities, when people have to operate in the shadows, when they have to be smuggled across the border because they can't legally cross, or there's no way to cross. The more you intensify the police state repression of the immigrant community, the more the organized gangs and drug cartels are going to have the upper hand. So that's not the answer. But, what's the answer coming from the left? Well, there's more sympathy, and sympathy is good, understanding, what the dreamers have gone through and what the immigrant communities have gone through. Sympathy is good, but you're not going to solve the problem with sympathy. The solution to the crisis on the border has a name, and that name is the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. At this point, China, the United States, Mexico, and Nicaragua need to come together for an emergency plan of economic development of that region. The reason people are fleeing Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador to come to the United States is because they don't have jobs, they don't have education, and they're living in terror of drug gangs, and they don't have running water, and they don't have electricity. There needs to be an emergency program of economic development of Central America right now. And Nicaragua would be happy to do it. China would be happy to do it. The government of Mexico, the leadership there, AMLO, he would be happy to do it. And if our government here in the United States was on board with that, it would solve the border problem because people wouldn't be fleeing for their lives. Plus, it would create all kinds of job opportunities. I mean, imagine if Arizona and New Mexico and Southern California and Texas suddenly had all kinds of jobs springing up because, people were being hired to build new railway and roads with Mexico all the way down to Guatemala, all the way down to Honduras, all the way down to Nicaragua. Imagine all kinds of Chinese corporations were setting up shop in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and Southern California, as well as in Mexico and in Honduras. I mean, this is a huge moneymaker. There's a lot of resources in this region. There's a lot of human beings who are looking for jobs and don't want to be involved with drug cartels and don't want to be fleeing for their lives. There's a huge opportunity for economic development, but it requires government action. The market's not going to do it. The free market is not going to do it, right? The free market is not just going to magically fix the problems of those regions. We need government action. The government of China, the government of the United States, the government of Mexico and Nicaragua have to come together and implement an emergency economic development program for that region. They need jobs, they need electricity, they need hospitals, they need education, and they need the drug cartels to be smashed. One of the most amazing things that I've seen is in Mexico and in Honduras, the local police are all bought off, they're corrupt. So working class people in their own neighborhoods and in their own communities have come together and formed militias of their own to fight these drug cartels, right? And these people are like Robin Hoods. They're like heroes. You go to some of these Mexican villages and the people have come together, they've gotten their weapons together, and they've driven out the drug cartels. They're like the Robin Hoods and the folk heroes of these regions. Now imagine if these, people's militias that have been formed to fight the drug cartels in Mexico teamed up with the government of Mexico and the government of the United States and China and Nicaragua. And in addition to fighting the drug cartels, they were building hospitals and building schools and building power plants. This could completely change things. And I mean, give it some time, MS-13 would be out of business. They would be out of business pretty soon. Pretty soon there wouldn't be a problem at the border. Pretty soon people would be like, why did we want the wall again? What was Trump talking about? There's no problem here. That's the answer. Economic development is the answer to the problem at our border. That's a real solution. And that's what we as socialists and leftists need to be talking about. We need a real solution to these problems, right? I mean, it's enough. We can scream revolution all day. I'm with you. We do need a whole new system. But we need to be putting forward policy proposals that could actually change the situation. And Fusion City, the Sandino Zapata Economic Corridor, the economic program that we've been developing at the Center for Political Innovation, these are real policy solutions. We need a government of action that will fight for working families, a government that says, oh no, we're not just going to sit back and let the country fall into ruin. We are going to swing into action to fight for working people and working families. We're going to provide jobs and education. We're going to get beyond fossil fuels. We're going to stop the situation that causes people to leave their homes and flee in terror. I mean, there are real solutions here, and this is what socialists should do. Real solutions. Look, the Social Security, the idea of Social Security, unemployment insurance, that was in the Communist Party platform in 1932, long before it was in the Democratic Party platform, right? Mm-hmm. And, the communists, we basically invented Social Security, and look how well that's worked out. Social Security is something that people recognize as a great thing. It was a solution. It was a policy solution. The communists of the 1930s during the Great Depression, they didn't just say, burn the country down, revolution. No, they put forward a program, unemployment insurance. And then there was a strike wave, and Roosevelt, he met with leaders of the communist labor unions and stuff, and he said, that's a good idea, and he implemented it as policy. Right? That came from the communists, right? We need to come up with real policy solutions that could be implemented. That would be a step toward building popular power and moving toward ultimately getting beyond capitalism.
So I'm not too informed about what I'm going to bring up here. But you said that imperialism is anything that can hold back economic development. So China, this is an argument that Marxist-Leninist Maoists use, is that China is funding the Filipino government to take down the Maoist group that's over there, these revolutionaries that are trying to, install revolution so they can have a country that works more, economically for their people there. What's your argument about whether that is imperialism or whether that's not imperialism?
Well, I think that, for a long time, the Philippines has just been a puppet of the United States. For many years, it was just a straight up puppet of the United States. There was the Marcos military dictatorship there. There started to be a feeling, we saw a rise of anti-imperialist sentiments in the Philippines. And, there has been a long-standing communist insurgency. There are a number of islands that are under the control of communist rebels. But there's also among the capitalists and among, non-communist folks in the Philippines, there's also been an increasing anti-imperialist sentiment. And, Duterte was elected and he had the endorsement of the communists. Jose Maria Sison, who is the leader of the communists in exile, I believe he's in the Netherlands, he endorsed Duterte in the elections. And Duterte's election was a popular front. He was seen as kind of the anti-imperialist candidate, more friendly to China, less friendly to the United States. And I believe Duterte even appointed a member of the illegal underground communist party to be like in his cabinet for a moment or something. But for whatever reason, the communists in the Philippines that controls certain islands and the Duterte government, they don't see eye to eye. They were not able to negotiate. They had peace talks going on for a while, and those peace talks have fallen apart. And that's deeply sad because I would like to see a situation where the communists are allowed to join the government of the Philippines and the people of the Philippines can have communists in their government and can have peace and not have a civil war going on. But Duterte and the communists, they negotiated, but they were unable to reach an agreement. So unfortunately, the war has continued, and that's not good for anybody. I think the communists would prefer to not be fighting, and I think that Duterte, and many of his supporters would prefer the war is over as well. But China, on the other hand, is doing business with the Philippines, and the Philippines is more independent now under Duterte than it has been in a long time. Under Duterte, they have significantly rolled back the presence of U.S. corporations. They're more willing to negotiate with China when it comes to the South China Sea. So that's a step forward for China to have the Philippines not just be a U.S. puppet, to have the Philippines, as a country that might be more friendly to them. So it makes sense that China would have a relationship with the Philippines, right? It makes sense that China would have a relationship with the Philippines. And China's position is generally that they are not involved in the political struggles of other countries, right? They're not sending weapons to the Maoist communist rebels. The Communist Party of the Philippines cut ties with the Chinese Communist Party in 1976. There's no relationship there. And China doesn't think it's its responsibility to be giving weapons and guns to a group of people and fomenting civil war in the Philippines. That's not the role that they want to play, right? Tim Pool and all of them were on there saying China wants to roll in with the tanks and, get rid of all our social media and round up all the intellectuals. No, they don't. Like, China does not want to spread communism all over the world. They're not Trotskyites. They don't believe in the theory of permanent revolution. China believes that their role is to engage in peaceful economic development and cooperation. That's their role, right? So, this Maoist communist group and the government of the Philippines, they're negotiating. And China has nothing to do with them, but China has to have a relationship with the government of the Philippines because the South China Sea is very important, and the United States is increasing its military presence there. So what China is doing in the Philippines, it makes sense that they would have if there were any government in the Philippines, Duterte or anybody, they would want to have a relationship with them and negotiate with them. And Duterte is more willing to work with China than previous administrations. So, that's a bit of an oversimplification there, but overall, it's not that simple. But we shouldn't be expecting China to be sending weapons and guns all over the world because that's not the kind of country they are. And imagine if they were doing that, right? I mean, look at what Tim Pool and all of them were saying, right? I mean, imagine if China was giving guns and weapons to people to spread violent communist revolutions. Imagine what they would say, and imagine how effective the United States would be in putting sanctions on them and isolating them if they operated that way. That's not the kind of country that China is.
But I was not that they're. No, my question wasn't whether they should sell weapons to the Maoist group. It was, are they selling it to the Filipino government to aid in their fight against the Maoist group? Is that what they're doing?
Certainly doing business with the government of the Philippines. I don't know if they're selling weapons or not. I mean, the main weapons exporter is the United States, and there is a U.S. military presence in the Philippines. It's technically like rented, I believe. It's not, the USA doesn't have like a permanent base. They have to rent it from the government of the Philippines. There's actual U.S. military folks in the Philippines and has been for a long time. The Philippines was at one point a U.S. territory. But I don't know if China is actually giving weapons to the government of the Philippines, but they're doing business with them, absolutely. And they would be happy to do business with any government in the Philippines, just like they do business with folks in Myanmar, just like they do business with folks in Vietnam, and that keep in mind that oil, right? China, one of its biggest weaknesses is that it's dependent on foreign oil. They do not have enough oil in China to keep their economy going. That's why they import a lot of Russian oil, but most of the oil that China imports comes on oil tankers that go through the South China Sea. That South China Sea, that is where they get their oil from. And that's why the United States is building up a huge military presence in the South China Sea, because it's a threat on China. They're saying basically at any point, if we want to just cut off your oil supply, China, we can do that. And it's a threat hanging over China's head. And that's why China has increased its own military presence in the South China Sea. So they could stop the United States if it tried to do that. But the United States wants to have the oil veto over China. And China, that is a big weakness that they have. And they don't want the United States to be able to do that. So the fact that they can have a relationship with the Philippines, that they can have a relationship with some of the other governments in that region, that enables them to put a check on the USA's ability to have an oil veto over their economy.
So I've been reporting on the Peruvian elections on my channel. So Keiko Fujimori, like how we were talking about before the stream, she's still refusing to accept the results of the election, despite the OAS, the US, Canada, the EU, all saying that there's no evidence of fraud, that it was a clean and fair election. So one of the things that I talk about that I've discussed on my show is how Peruvians in Peru, a lot of them are very traumatized about what happened during the 80s and 90s when the Shining Path, this Maoist group, when a lot of them, a group of them, used very counterproductive strategies by which ended up killing some innocent people in Peru. I think it's counterproductive what some of the members in that group did, because look at how long Peru has been a neoliberal country and how difficult it is for a socialist leaning candidate like Pedro Castillo to win the election. Well, there's a lot of Peruvians that are so afraid of that, and they're being manipulated by the mainstream corporate media in Peru. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on whether you also think that some of the strategies that the Shining Path did in Peru during the 80s and 90s were counterproductive, and what some communists can learn from these mistakes.
Well, the first thing we need to point out is that communists always favor a peaceful transition to socialism. We don't want war. We prefer to get elected and transfer to socialism in a peaceful way. It's generally the capitalists who have another idea and, are violent and, tend to move toward fascism to prevent, the democratic process from leading toward socialism. And that's why Pedro Castillo, who, calls himself a Marxist-Leninist, and he's very much running in the elections as a peaceful candidate, trying to, he has a beautiful platform, which I read his platform out loud on one of my streams. It's just an amazing platform. And this guy's a real revolutionary. But he would like to come to power peacefully. He doesn't want there to be a big civil war to destroy Peru. The Shining Path, first, let me just ask you straight up. Now, imagine somebody knocked on your door. You got a knock on your door. Someone said, "Hi, I'm from a group called the Shining Path." Would you think they were a communist? Was that what would come to your mind?
Initially, no.
You'd probably think this was some kind of religious cult or something, right? The Jehovah's Witnesses, or the Shining Path. It was a very strange, very small political group on a college campus. It was a college professor, and he had a group of students that were like his little, club. They liked him or whatever. And one day they just all disappeared, and people were like, "Oh, okay," and people didn't hear from them. And then out of the blue, like 10 years later, all of a sudden, people were hearing reports of people getting their heads chopped off, and people were seeing dogs. Their trademark was hanging dogs. They would find a dog and they would hang the dog in front of your house as a threat on you. And people would see the spray painting, like, "Long live Presidente Gonzalo," "Long live the Shining Path." People thought this was some kind of wacky religious terrorist cult or something. People didn't even know they were communists, right? Well, there is a big gap, like there is in most developing countries, between the city and the countryside. And the people in Peru, in particular, the folks in the countryside are indigenous. Whereas you have a lot more whiter people in the city. So there's a racial component to that as well. And the people in the Peruvian countryside, the indigenous folks, are very, very impoverished. Again, many of them don't speak Spanish, but speak indigenous languages, don't have running water, don't have electricity. And, the Shining Path was organizing them. And that was a good thing that they organized them. And they fought for their land and such. That's, I can respect that. But Peru also has cities in it. And when they started moving toward trying to take the cities in their civil war, if you read Mao, his whole thing about people's war, right? The idea is you set up a base area in the countryside, but then eventually you take the cities. But the way you take the cities is you enter an alliance with the factory labor unions, with the communist groups and stuff. That's not what the Shining Path did. The Shining Path murdered the leaders of the factory labor unions. Right. They murdered the leaders of the real Communist Party of Peru. They assassinated people. These people a lot of the Peruvian communists I talked to had never heard of the Shining Path until one day they're having their communist meeting and some crazed, person walks in with a gun and shouts, "Viva Presidente Gonzalo," and starts blowing people away and starts shooting at them when people are running for cover. One of the first things the Shining Path did is bomb the Chinese embassy. Right? They were hostile to Cuba. They threatened, people associated with Cuba and Cuban government-aligned targets. And this was just a violent extremist group. But the reason that they had, the reason that they had, people following them was because of the fact that the indigenous folks of Peru, there's a lot of resentment they have against the urban folks who live a lot better and don't respect them and all of that. So there's that gap, number one. And number two is the Soviet Union was collapsing at the time and communism was in retreat. So instead of, joining the mainstream Communist Party, you had the rise of, these kind of crazy groups. Around the same time in the United States, we had, what was that guy, the Branch Davidians, the Waco, Texas incident, and you had, Osama bin Laden and people like that were rising in the Middle East. And that, because communism was in retreat, some of these weird, wacky, other kind of things took the hold. And the Shining Path was one of those things. But what the Shining Path did more than anything was it set the stage for the dictatorship. I mean, the Fujimori, the other candidate, the right-wing candidate, her father, because people were so terrified of the Shining Path, he became the dictator. He established a military dictatorship. And because people were so terrified of this violent, extremist, crazed, peasant Jacobin, group that was going around cutting people's heads off. And I'm sorry, but this is the 21st century. If you're executing people by cutting people's heads off, I at that point, some alarm bells should go off. That sounds a little bit more like ISIS to me. You know what I'm saying? And they were engaging in this terrorism. The public was very scared. So Fujimori was able to establish a dictatorship. And Fujimori was an austerity guy. He brought in neoliberalism. So because of this insurgency that caused all these problems, that set the stage for a brutal dictatorship. And yes, it's there's been a rise in socialism and leftist thought in Venezuela and in Ecuador and in Bolivia, but Peru was always politically very behind because people were traumatized by the horrors of that civil war spawned by these ultra leftist elements, right? But now Pedro Castillo, it seems like finally things have moved ahead. Pedro Castillo is very popular. He's the legitimate winner of the election if they would just declare the results already. And it seems like a lot of Peruvians have gotten over their fear of communism, but that fear of communism was based on the actions of some crazed ultra leftists. I wrote a whole book called City Builders and Vandals. Leftism is about building. It's about constructing. It's about creating a whole new society. It's not about tearing things down. And the Shining Path and a lot of ultra leftist groups, some of these anarchist sects that engage in bombings and assassinations. I believe President McKinley, U.S. President McKinley, was shot by an anarchist, and this kind of left adventurism and terrorism never helps working people. It always makes things worse. And when there have been violent revolutions, it's only happened because the broad masses of people, millions of people, have tried a peaceful solution and found that they're unable, that they are met with violence and terror, and they're forced to defend themselves. The Russian Revolution was an act of self-defense. The Chinese Revolution was an act of self-defense. The Cuban Revolution was an act of self-defense. Violent revolutions are always an act of self-defense by the broad masses of people after they realize that they're unable to have a peaceful transition, after their democratic mass movement is suppressed and threatened. And that's what we need to understand. Communists we are not left adventurists. We are not terrorists. We are not advocates of violence. We're not punchists. We're not blanquists. Communists are advocates of a peaceful transition to a socialist society.
Yeah, like the stories that I hear from my family members there, it's like they'd be in buses, and this was very common. Like there would be in buses, and then the Shining Path, some of its members would block traffic. They'd go in the bus, they'd give their speeches, and they'd be like, if you're not with us, tell us, and then we'll kill you. Like they're there with their guns. Of course people are gonna be like, yeah, we agree with you, but this is you're not supposed to, if you want people to come over to your group, you're not supposed to make them be afraid of you. You have to make them feel important, make them feel comfortable, right? So it's super counterproductive, and unfortunately a lot of people in Peru put the Shining Path and communism as synonyms when that's not true. And I tell my family this. It's like there are Christian extremists, there are Muslim extremists. It doesn't mean that all Muslims, that all Christians are like this, right? It's the same thing here. Not all communists are like that. Not even the majority at all. so that it's unfortunate that that's what occurred in Peru, and that it set a socialist government from arising back for, what is it, like 3 decades, ever since it began. But yeah, any final thoughts on that?
Well, no, I just, again, often, some of the most vulgar distortions of our ideas are actually promoted by our enemies. Pol Pot was supported by the United States, right? Pol Pot was, he was a lot like the Shining Path. He argued that you could build socialism in Cambodia on the basis of poverty and extreme scarcity. And he attacked Vietnam because Vietnam, they weren't real communists or whatever, and he attacked Vietnam. Well, now we know it's a fact that Pol Pot was on the payroll of the U.S. government and the CIA, and they were using him to manipulate communists in Southeast Asia against each other. The USA pulled its troops out of Vietnam, and so then it started covertly supporting Pol Pot. And, there was an ugly war. You read about what went on, the Kampuchea War, and China played a very negative role in that, in my view, and I think that was one of the worst moments of Deng Xiaoping, was his role in that. But ultimately, that sometimes these ultra left distortions of our ideas are not really coming from socialism. They're coming from our enemies, right? And that's why I wrote a whole book, Bread Tube Serves Imperialism, because there are a lot of very big distortions of our ideas out on the internet, and being spread right now. And whether it's, the Shining Path, whether it's Pol Pot, whether it's Bread Tube, it's our responsibility as socialists to, present the real message, right? To uphold the tradition of William Z. Foster, Gus Hall, Huey Newton, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, Claudia Jones. There is a real tradition of revolutionary socialism. And it's this tradition that made Russia and China into superpowers, that enabled Cuba to have, one of the greatest healthcare systems in the world, that invented space travel, that defeated the Nazis in World War II and built a mass working class anti-fascist united front all over the world, a popular front against fascism. We come from a beautiful, noble tradition. Those of us who call ourselves communists should be very proud of ourselves, because we are the tradition of some of the greatest and most heroic people in the world, and we should be proud of ourselves. And we shouldn't let people like the Shining Path or Pol Pot or advocates of degrowth and deconstruction, or advocates of terrorism and left adventurous violence. We shouldn't let them usurp our good image. Some of the greatest minds in the world, some of the most amazing intellectuals and scientists were communists. And we come from a noble tradition. And ultimately, we are going to save the world from imperialism and the greed of big corporations and banks. And the ultimate goal is to create a world with so much abundance and so much prosperity that the need for a government itself fades away. And we can have a world where people just do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability to each according to their needs, a post-scarcity society. We are advocates of technology. We are advocates of human advancement. We are city builders. That's what we are at the end of the day. That's the kind of socialism that I believe in. That's the kind of socialism they believe in China and in Cuba and in Latin America and in all over the world. We need that kind of socialism in the United States. We need an optimistic 21st century constructive socialist left. That's what I'm trying to build, and that's what I'm trying to put out on my live streams. So there you go.
Well said, Caleb. Yeah, those are excellent closing remarks there. That's a great way to end the show here. Caleb, thank you very much for coming on the show. You guys can follow Caleb on his YouTube channel. It's called Caleb Maupin. He streams very regularly. He has a fun community there. They have a lot of inside jokes there about unnamed diet beverages and all that. I believe you also have a Discord as well, right?
Well, the fans have set it up. I'm not involved with the Discord, but yeah, I think there's 2 of them. I think they were fighting with each other at one point. So there you go. So yeah.
All right, there you guys go. And thank you guys very much for watching. And don't forget to stay informed. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.